What is the end of unified meditation? Well, that is the attainment of unified consciousness. There are many transitory stages in that unified consciousness of mind. But now, in this section, I want to describe to you what is the final or ultimate stage of UC. I have to describe this final stage because it is the destination that anybody who would be practicing unified meditation would aspire for. I had written two books about this unified consciousness. They were part of my trilogy of the unified theory of motivation and living. The third one is still in the ideation stage. Intuitively, I wrote those two books before writing this book on meditation. I wanted to first write down how I perceived and lived in this world. And then I realized that when I was done with writing down my perception and awareness of this world, I was now ready to teach the other millions of people who seek such a unified consciousness to actually attain it. My two earlier books received a very low audience because they were complex, and it wasn't meant for anybody who just wanted their transformation. It just described a different worldview, a different cosmology. It was originally mine, but it didn't just pop up in my mind out of the blue. No, that awareness of the world that I had developed over the decades were the result of the kind of meditation that I was practicing, along with the kind of books I had access to. So, in those two books, I talk about that final stage of unified meditation, whereby we are conscious in a very different way. Let me explain before I talk about the actual unified consciousness. For example, after we study economics, we cannot help ourselves to look at various business transactions around us differently. Before, wherever we saw people buying and selling, now we see demand and supply. Whenever we hear that the price of gold has increased, or there was a bubble somewhere that burst, we understand that economics is at play here. So in this way, our study of economics changed the way we perceive the world of transactions. Then, after studying biology, we cannot purely believe in witchcraft. There must be some bacteria or virus or some genetic causation behind a disease, because now we know the anatomy and the various systems in the body. In this way, we cannot undo what we know. Similarly, after studying and learning physics, we cannot think that some ghost is pulling the apple down, but now it is known as gravity. After understanding the physics of Einstein, we cannot prevent ourselves from imagining light bending. Despite the debacle with the cosmological constant, with Einstein's special theory of gravitation, we now cannot look at the sky and not accept that it is expanding, and many billions of years ago it was the size smaller than a grain of sand. After studying psychology, we cannot be angry at somebody who is different than us because we know that his psychology is different and his misbehavior has got a psychological cause. Also, the conflict that arises in us is because of an incompatibility in our personalities. So, what I'm getting at is after we learn new things that are scientifically verified, the way we look at the world changes. But mind you, not everything that changes our worldview needs to be true or scientifically verifiable. For example, look at the conflict in Israel, Palestine, and Iran. Their consciousness is affected by the other person's aggressive act, although there is no scientific benefit in war. Sometimes one parent teaches his or her child to hate the other parent, sometimes directly and sometimes indirectly, and there is no scientific basis for that also. But that's how things are or can be. Now, similarly, unified meditation leads us to perceive the world or to be conscious about the world in a very different way because it is a practice that I have initiated. I have to take responsibility for what I have postulated in my two books. However, the theories that I have put forward are very logical and they can very well explain the things that happen around us as well as make predictions. Of course, this is to do with spiritual science, if there is anything such as it. We are not talking about motion, heat, or even money, or simply the mental state. No, we are talking about life and living. The central theme of my theories is motivational force. I have spent more than 300 words in part 1 and 600 pages in part 2 to explain my unified theories of motivational living. So it will be impossible for me to try to fit in a short and crisp explanation here without missing major points. But I will try in a few thousand words in this section. I urge you to read my two books for more details. But if you do not do so, even the summary that I'm going to write now will give you some correct picture of what unified consciousness is. So there are three main things that you have to understand in the part 1 of my trilogy. The first one is what I call the 48 motivators and the 3 meta motivators. The diagram is just below or next to you if you are watching the video book. The second point is what I call the format 1, format 2, and format 3 living. They are derived again from the 3 meta motivators. We'll talk about the diagram that you are seeing now later on. The third point is the theory of karma and how we get the fruits of our karma and what type of karma we do as shown in the diagram. So let us begin. So this table represents the 48 motivators that causes us to do whatever we do. It might be a far-fetched claim, but in my book I have proved to you that it is reducible to those 48 motivators. They are divided into three columns, which I have called the meta motivators. First one is the meta motivator of goodness. As the name suggests, this is the good motivators list. 16 of them. The next is the meta motivator of passion. As the name suggests, it is less good than the first one, but better than the third one. Like any act of passion, motivation inspired by the 16 meta motivators under this category will lead to some kind of problems in the future. The third one is the meta motivator of ignorance. As the name suggests, these 16 motivators are related to foolishness, and they lead to undesired outcomes. The diagram on the right shows person A and person B. So the first diagram at the top, the person is performing an action or a karma that is based on the motivator of revenge, which is in line number 7 and under the meta motivator of passion. This results in an outcome A. Then below, another person does the same karma or action, but this time he performs it under the motivator of honor, which is in line number 3 under the meta motivator of goodness, and he gets a different outcome, which is B. So this is the overall theme of this concept, and I urge you to read the book to learn more about it. So as not to just leave you disappointed, let me just give you example of this particular revenge and calm motivators. In the first diagram, the person might have hit somebody out of revenge. So the person who got hit would either hit back or will do something that the person will have to regret. Alternatively, the person A would himself feel sad and will regret after realization. Then the person B would also hit the person, but it would be out of honor. So the action is the same, but the motivation is different. The person who is being hit will feel that it was done for his own good. And even though at the beginning person B didn't like the feeling of having to hit that person, even be it for honor, later on he'll feel vindicated. So in my part 1 of the trilogy, I expound extensively about this principle. Next, I would like to explain to you the second major point of the unified theory of motivation and living. The unified consciousness helps us see our life as a sequence between happiness and suffering. As you can see in the diagram on your right hand side, for those who are watching the video book, and above for those who are reading the book version, I have described that there are three formats of this particular sequence between happiness and suffering. I know I'm jumping directly to the concept of format instead of taking you on a background and some introduction, but I took this liberty because this concept is just so easy. And then if you really want to know more about its origin and its implication, then I really encourage you to read my book. But for now, let's limit ourselves with the diagram. So what these three formats are telling is that we have 1 in 3 options to perform our karma and thus live our lives. Again, like physics talks about the motion of the planets and the atoms and of fluids or gases. Similarly, unified consciousness talks about living, happiness, and suffering. It tries to give a model or theory of why some people are happy and some people are suffering. It is like Newton and Einstein trying to explain gravity. It is inevitable. Similarly, suffering is inevitable. However, unlike gravity having a single equation, whether we abide to Newtonian physics or Einstein physics, unified consciousness has got three equations or formats for suffering and happiness. I'm not sure I can prove those formats mathematically, but intuitively they make pretty much a lot of sense. They are derived from the earlier meta motivators of goodness, passion, and ignorance. You'll remember that there were three of them, and similarly, there are three formats. Format one is related to the meta motivator of ignorance and 16 motivators under it. Similarly, format 2 is related to the meta motivator of passion and the 16 meta motivators under it. Then format 3 is related to the meta motivator of goodness and the 16 motivators under it. Basically, if somebody performs a karma or action under the influence of a motivator which is one among the 16 of the meta motivator of ignorance, then that falls under format 1. The same applies for the other two formats. So format 1, happiness, is shown in the first sets of three arrows. In that happiness, at first you feel what I call a dopamine happiness. Dopamine, serotonin, and endorphin are the three happy hormones secreted in our bodies that neurobiology has identified. So, like dopamine is related to format 1 happiness, serotonin is related to format 2 happiness, and endorphin is related to format 3 happiness. You'll notice in all the three sets of arrows that they all start with a karma or action. In the first set, as we discussed, dopamine happiness is produced, which is one that makes us feel like we are having a kick, a burst of joy, and that makes us excited. You can say it's the fun type of happiness. However, as you can see, as the arrow is showing, it leads to cortisol. Now, cortisol here is the suffering. You'll notice that in the other two sets also there is cortisol. What the first set is telling is that when we perform a karma in the meta motivator of ignorance, then we get a dopamine happiness, but then soon it leads us to produce cortisol, which is what we experience as suffering. In the second set, action is performed in the meta motivator of passion that leads to serotonin kind of happiness. It is one that makes us feel special, important, and high class. However, that one also leads to cortisol or suffering after some time. Finally, after we learned about format 2 happiness, in format 3 happiness, the action is performed under the meta motivator of goodness. Unlike the other two formats, this one first leads to suffering or cortisol. Then afterwards, it leads to endorphin kind of happiness. It is feeling of purity and well-being, benevolence. So what this concept is telling us that format 3 happiness is about suffering now, enjoying later, while format 2 and format 1 happiness are about enjoying now and suffering later. Now, we all knew all these things to some extent, but in my book, I expounded it very deeply and in details. Using these concepts, it becomes very easy to live with the least possible suffering and to understand suffering, thereby finding happiness. I live by the knowledge and the perception of these three formats and the meta motivators and the 48 motivators. I tell you that it makes life so much easier and more pleasant, as well as more certain, despite the uncertainty that is around us. So, unified consciousness enables us to be almost immune to suffering, and even when suffering comes, we can make sense of it. I've talked about it a lot in my two books of the unified theory of motivational living. So, before I get carried away and start explaining how unified consciousness has worked for me and what it is and how it can work for you, I will move to the next subsection. This is, as I told you, because I've already talked about it in my two books and it would be too long here. Why or how the outcomes are determined for the various karma that are performed. When I throw a ball forward, what kind of motion does it take and where will it fall? Physics talks about projectile motion, and it says that the force with which you throw the ball and the angle it is thrown at determines where the ball will reach. So physics and chemistry have got all those various formulas that can be put into a mathematical equation, and then we can use calculus to determine the rate, the area, the volume, the distance, whatever we need. It will consider various parameters, put them into an equation using mathematical modeling. The sciences thus find a relationship between the various components and they make predictions. This is how we can use Newton's equation to determine when will be the next lunar eclipse or solar eclipse, even though it's hundreds of years from now. And the interesting point is, even though Einstein's theories were based on totally different concepts of the universe, the equation will still provide the same answer to when will the next lunar or solar eclipse be as the Newtonian equation. Basically, it's math at work. I'm bringing that particular example to introduce you to my concept of karma, which I have drawn in the diagram that you can see. It's a very complicated diagram, and even in my book, The Unified Theory of Motivation and Living Part 1, it came in the last chapter after I explained all the various concepts. So you are looking at it without the earlier ideas, that is very difficult. Still, I just wanted to present it to you so that you could appreciate the full extent of my theories. I will just describe to you in short what the diagram is telling. I wish one day it could become an equation like E is equal to mc square. But that's very far from now. However, it just describes how a karma that we do produces the outcome. So let me begin. The equation of the story starts with in the left hand side. At the center, you will notice that there is a triangle, and below that triangle there is something I've written as new karma. So this is the beginning of the diagram. This karma is produced by the individual ego or I. The triangle represents the composition of that person, which consists of the center of consciousness or COCs or chakra that we have talked about earlier. It also consists of the various knowledge, skills, and attitude of that person, as well as the habits of that person. That new karma is also affected by the place and time of the karma. Now you have understood the first box. Now I would like you to take a look at the last box at the right hand side. It represents the outcome of that particular karma, and the outcome, as you can see, is taken from the above three formats that we discussed. So there is dopamine success or happiness, serotonin success or happiness, and endorphin success or happiness, along with the cortisol, which is the suffering. In this way, the new karma produces one of the three outcomes that we listed in format 3, 1 and 2 earlier on. Now I would like you to take a look at the rectangle consisting of the three ovals or circles between the two boxes we talked already about. So basically they are called the karmic control systems, and they determine when and how the outcomes will be manifest. These three combined will determine whether the outcome will occur now, after some time, or in next life. They will also determine whether the outcome will be added with some past life outcomes that needed to be experienced. It's a very complicated concept if you are not well versed in what I call the tree theory of the infinite individuals and the tree theory of the infinite universes from which these concepts come. Again, I have explained them in immense detail in my trilogy. Now, I would like you to take a look at the circular arrow in the left hand side. This one determines the mix of the 48 motivators and the 3 meta motivators in the current era that the karma is being performed. What I'm telling is the meta motivator mix is like the climate. It is like saying that sometimes there is the ice age and sometimes there is volcanic ages, and sometimes it's normal times. Similarly, sometimes the meta motivator of goodness is predominant across that particular era or area, location, whereas some other times it could be the meta motivator of passion, and yet another time it could be the meta motivator of ignorance. So unified consciousness is about having a grasp on such concepts. I know I have probably gone off your head at this point, but I just wanted to explain to you what you could understand in your journey of unified meditation. Myself, as a practitioner of unified meditation, these concepts that I have summarized as unified consciousness are an integral part of my perception and awareness of the world around me every day. And it can be yours too.